Just a little punctuation there.
Sounds good.
Should be reporting right now.
Okay, this is the Open Space and Ecology Committee meeting of August 1st, 2013, special session to work on reviewing the draft EIR for the Baylands. So I'll call the meeting to order. And the first item is the adoption of the agenda. I would like to add to the agenda, well, we have a discussion for reviewing the remainder of the DEIR, and also an update from Monday night's council meeting.
I mean, I just think that kind of falls
Goes
under
in.
that.
Okay,
Rolls into that, okay.
okay. So is there a move to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I was
Okay.
going to only suggest, did you want to move the discussion of reviewing the remainder before? you start talking
Actually, I
about it?
would like to.
So that's probably the change that we should make,
Okay,
to move B before A.
so we'll move B before A. Do I need to move anything on that? Okay.
I still move it.
Okay, second. Okay, all those in favor? Aye, done. Okay, so on Monday night.
You don't want to have oral communications?
Oh.
Look at all these people. See, they can't tell on TV that they're not there. So we could pretend we have a crowded house.
But none of
Sorry,
them have their
Michelle.
hands up.
I apologize.
We have a large fan club that watches from afar and is encouraged by the work we're doing, and we've been complimented many times by many people, so I share that with the whole group. And I don't see anyone at this moment clamoring for oral communications, probably because at the outset of this process, we announced that any comments made in this meeting on the EIR, draft EIR, would not be part of the public record. If you have comments to make on the draft EIR that you wish to be part of the public record, you must do it at the sessions held by the Planning Commission.
Or in writing.
Or in writing, which we encourage everyone to do, Pick your part that you're most passionate about, or do the entire thing. So Stuart, do you want to bring us up to date on what happened at the council meeting Monday night, or shall I?
You can.
Okay. Monday night at the Brisbane City Council meeting, I spoke during oral communications because I was not sure that our request was actually agendized. And so during oral communications, I asked the City Council to extend the comment period to January 31st, 2014. I cited our reasons as stated in the memorandum that we sent them. And they had some consultation with our new city attorney, who basically said, you can extend the comment period, but it's highly unusual to extend it that far, but you can do it. And the council decided to postpone the discussion of that. Well, there was, the progress on the draft EIR was a later agenda, at the end of the agenda, which I didn't stay for. But the council had a discussion at that time that they would review the progress of all of the committees and would revisit this at their regular meeting on August 19th. So at this time, we do not know if the Brisbane City Council is willing to extend the draft EIR comment period. Some of the discussion about extending the date surrounded their discussion about a community survey that they are planning to do and how that would impact the timing of the survey, because they would like the survey to be timed after the draft EIR is in comment period, but before they adopt the final EIR. So the timing of the community-wide survey is in question based on when the comment period would be. But they're beginning work on drafting the questions and scope of the community survey.
Right. I mean, their hope is that part of the basis for the survey would be what the comments are that are made on the draft DIR, so that way they would have a better understanding of what issues the public would need to have clarified, or what issues they have that, the council may need clarified through the process.
Something that occurred to me is I should just let everybody know that I cannot work on this personally in November or October, so whatever happens, I have to wrap it up in October because I do Dickens Fair in November and October, which means I'm working all week. I'm working basically 7 days a week at that point for 2 months, so.
You do Dickens Fair in October and November, or November?
November, December.
November,
Misspoke.
December.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we appreciate, those of us who attend regularly appreciate the work that you do.
Yes, we do.
But I'm roadkill for those 2 months. I cannot. This can't happen. If it goes into November, December, you guys are on your own.
Well, hopefully we would pick it back up in January if that was the case.
Well, and I hope if that happens, that you'll do the best you can reviewing the parts that the committee hasn't discussed, and give us your comments on those. Thank you.
Okay, so that takes us back to our schedule of what we had anticipated doing for based on the comment period ending on the 8th of October. And so what we need to decide is what we're going to discuss chapter-wise, because it helps us to get our reading done in advance. And I, for one, had a very challenging time getting the reading done in anticipation of tonight's meeting. And then also between tonight's meeting and Monday night's meeting is a very short interval. And I wanted to know if everybody is still okay with Monday night's schedule.
Could you refresh our memories?
Monday night, August 5th. And we haven't assigned the chapters per se yet, or have we?
I was going to say, I think we should keep to it if we can, because the more we slip, the more, without knowing whether or not the city council is going to extend our deadline, I personally become uncomfortable. But I was going to suggest that maybe we do one of the shorter sets.
Noise is short.
Yeah, like
Noise is short.
air quality and greenhouse gases, or maybe,
We weren't going to do those anyway.
utilities, service systems, and energy resources, I think was another, yeah. Those are just some suggestions.
I could have noise done by Monday.
Okay. So do we want to put chapter, sorry.
Traffic and circulation is fairly long,
That was going to be its own thing.
yeah.
Noise is-
But at 151 pages, it's still longer than number 5, which was the utility services and energies at 79 pages, and number 1, air quality and greenhouse gases at 75 pages.
Can't find my little chart that I wrote everything down on. Oh, here it is.
Oh, yeah, that.
I think we should, I mean, I've been planning on it, I don't think I'm the only one. Well, clearly not, because Barbara has comments on it, who's prepared to discuss the aesthetics and visual resources, and it's not a particularly difficult one to read either. So I think we should go ahead with that. Tonight, and if we
Tonight, if we
finish
can,
it.
yeah.
Right.
Okay, do it Monday.
And then, so continue 4.A on Monday, and then do noise and vibration, which is 4J on Monday. And do we want to put something else in there too for Monday? I'm not going to have a lot of reading time between now and Monday, but the short chapters in terms of the text are greenhouse gas emissions, recreation resources, but Kima's not here, so I'd hate to assign that while he's gone. Energy resources, which is also Kima and Barbara. And then, I guess,
Water.
cultural resources. Do you want to tack on cultural resources on there, 4D?
Sure.
Okay.
I've been thinking that greenhouse gases were August 14th. I thought we'd kind of agreed that already.
Yeah, I thought we had a
Yeah, I thought we did too, and I don't know why I'm not finding it in my binder.
I think I think the 14th, we decided we were only going to do one, and that's why you said greenhouse gases.
Traffic.
But I don't think we really thought about the others yet. That was
We hadn't gone past that, no.
right, but we were talking about having greenhouse gases on the 14th, since that's going to be a regular meeting, and you're going to have the zip car back to you, and we're going to have a presentation on climate action plan to you on the 14th.
So the 14th is going to be greenhouse gases? That's 4F. And then we have the big long one on Saturday, August 24th, which at this point we're still scheduled for because we don't know if the council's going to extend or not.
Oh, I didn't bring my book.
And so the 24th, what we would like to discuss on the 24th, it's a Saturday. It'll still only be 3 hours, but we should maybe tackle a challenging subject so that, but Barbara's not going to be here that day.
Yeah, but you guys have to do something while I'm not here, so.
Right. Is there anything you're particularly not interested in, Barbara?
No, I don't want to.
Okay, so, any suggestions? Air quality and greenhouse gases, or,
I thought we were doing greenhouse gases on the 14th.
oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
Hazardous materials?
Do you want to do hazardous materials, Mary?
I think Barbara should be here for that one.
I do too.
Yeah, I mean, but it's hard for me to say would, why
Right.
not, you know?
Right.
Say-
Shall we do biological resources?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay,
We could do that.
4.
I can also, send in my comments, hopefully.
Yeah, but
And with biological resources, do we want to try to get through public services?
sure.
Okay. Then the,
And somebody will type this up and send it to me, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Stuart? Yeah.
Yes, so far I'm tracking here.
Okay. Then Thursday, the 29th was the date that we were going to have Lloyd Zola.
We were going to ask, but you also said that you may have wanted him later,
Right.
because you may have wanted to go through more of the chapters before you talked to him about methods. So that's where I was.
I thought we decided to keep it the same.
Well, we hadn't really decided because we sort of discussed it, but then we kind of came to a standstill when we didn't know what the council's pleasure is in regard to extending the draft EIR. So I'm good either way, but that means that we won't have enough meetings to review everything else. And that's not a good place. So frankly, I think at this point we should go ahead with having maybe hazardous materials on the 29th?
We just decided to, oh, okay.
No, that was biology.
Because we need to get through hazardous materials.
Right, I mean.
I wish I knew whether they were going to extend the period or not. It would make such a difference in our scheduling.
Right, I mean, it just may make some sense to schedule the ones that are of the highest interest and have those that are the lowest interest be further down, so that way if for some reason they don't extend it, you don't cut out what you have, the highest interest in. I mean, that's my, not the best advice, not the best advice I'd want to give you, but it's probably the best advice I could give you at this point,
Yeah.
without knowing what they're going to do.
Oh, just so you know.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not available September 28th. It was something I thought was on a different week than it actually was.
Okay. So on Wednesday, the 14th, besides our regular meeting, and we're going to do 4F, which is greenhouse gas emissions, Let's try to do 4E also, geology. Let's stack these up a little bit more.
Okay, that's Sean's, right?
Right.
He'll be back. He just has something this upcoming weekend, and then he's
And then on the
available again.
29th, I mean, what do you think about Zola or not?
Wait, what about the 24th? So
The
we're staying with
24th we had-
biological resources?
4C, 4L, and we should put one more in there. 4C, biological resources.
And that's the one that Barbara is not available for?
Right.
Okay.
Who else is doing that besides Mary?
Well, 4L is public services, that's me.
No, biological resources.
Oh, me.
Oh, okay.
And,
We got to talk about the water, and I would like to,
Yeah.
it would be good to do that before we talk, because I think we'll have some questions for Zola about the methodology of that, especially.
so how about 4H? 4C, 4H, 4L.
Is that the water?
And that's
Yeah.
for the 24th?
That's surface water hydrology and water quality.
20.
Yes.
And 4L would be the third one we would do that day because it's of less importance.
That's public services, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Let's just let public services go.
Yeah.
For now.
I agree.
Okay.
And the same thing goes for cultural resources,
I
unless
agree.
somebody knows anything to the contrary.
Okay, so
And the same thing goes for land use and planning policy.
Land use and planning policy is really, I think, kind of important.
Well, I think, have you read any of the chapter?
No.
Yeah, I don't know what this is going to say about it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Is it going to say this isn't, is it going to say this conflicts with the general plan, therefore the mitigation is to change the general plan, or something useless like that?
Well, we still need to comment on it, Mary. All the more reason to comment on it.
Yeah, but if that's all it's going to be, then the comments can be,
Yeah.
Pretty short
Yeah.
or pretty long?
Yeah.
Saying why we wouldn't want to change the general plan.
I'd read ahead, but that would ruin the book for me.
Yeah. It probably has a bad ending, Stuart.
I was telling Clay about the narrative. I was talking to John that I can't find any characters that I'm like siding with yet.
Well, let's put 4I on Saturday, the 24th also. So we
can't do that, I'm not here for that one.
Oh, okay.
I think biological resources and water is enough.
Okay. Now, Thursday, the 29th, Lloyd Zola. Yay or nay?
I'm totally screwed up, but that's why you're going to email this all to me.
So what I have so far is on the 5th, we're going to do 4A and 4J. And we took
wait.
off-
And 4D.
I thought that was one of the ones that that,
It's so small, we'll just tack it on the end there.
that's what I heard that, and then I heard, let's
I think we
hold
should
it off.
leave it, and
Okay.
it'll be so small, we'll just tack it on the end there.
And then on the 14th, I have 4F and
I
4E.
can't follow you. So have we assigned 4A yet? Oh,
Yes.
that's today.
Today.
Whee!
Well, it's also, we'll
Today and the
continue
5th.
on Monday.
Yes, today and the 5th.
4B, have we assigned that?
We have not done 4B, but I've got 4F and 4E on the 14th.
So I thought we did 4C.
No, I got the 4C on the 24th,
Oh, on the 24th.
along with
okay.
4L at the end of the 24th, and 4H.
We're not going to do 4L.
Oh, never mind.
No, take
I
4L off.
I can't find them
4L
as fast as you're
Take
rattling.
4L off.
so-
Is there a third one you want to do on the 24th then?
No?
Okay, and then on the 29th, it's 4G and Lloyd, if he's available.
Smart way.
Is that how you would like to do
I'm gonna
it?
do it.
Yes?
Okay. Now that brings us to September 11th, which is a regular meeting,
September
but that
11th.
one you may want to skip as a regular meeting and just do draft EIR all day.
Right, September
And
11th, I will not be here.
You're not going to be here, and I will not be here that day, but we
Stuart.
will have somebody else sitting in a chair here.
So what do you want to do on the 11th?
I was thinking visiting the British Museum.
Traffic and circulation?
Who's on that with me? Anybody besides me interested in that?
Well, I'm interested, but I'm not doing it.
No, doing it, I mean.
No, I didn't have any second person.
You don't have 4B yet, which I think is one of those ones I think you're going to want to spend
Or
time
B,
on.
Mary, that's air quality.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay,
Well,
or
although you're not going to be here, Michelle.
air quality?
Yeah, would that bother you to not be here for that?
let me tell you what I've started to read the chapter. I haven't gotten very far yet. But essentially it says, we have pretty good air here because all the air pollution just blows into the Central Valley. It doesn't say it blows into the Central Valley. But my big problem with the analysis is that it doesn't discuss the fact that the air pollution all goes somewhere. It's just kind of like, it'll be fine. I mean, it does say that all of these, it does say that the traffic impacts will mean more non-attainment days, and that's significant, unavoidable. But that's pretty much all it says. And I think that there should be, if traffic's going to get that much worse, the cars are just going to be standing there accumulating toxins, then I think, and we're going to ship them all to Dublin, then I think that ought to be recognized in the CIR. And I don't think, I haven't, as I said, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I don't think it is.
Not to mention the fact that we'll be burning a lot more fossil fuels while the cars are sitting there in traffic.
Yeah.
Does it say anything about,
Not to mention, that stretch of 101 is assigned to Brisbane's carbon footprint, and if we're supposed to try to neutralize that,
Right.
it's not going to work.
So do you want to do 4B and 4N on the 11th, which would be air quality and traffic circulation?
No, I
Okay,
don't.
that's fine. I'm just trying to put something there.
I know, but
Want to do that on the 18th?
yes,
Okay, so 4B and 4N on the 18th.
So now we're into September, right?
We are into September.
wait a minute.
so September 11th,
You could,
Wait, 11th or 8th, wait.
the
we
18th
still have
will
the
be
11th.
4B and
We're-
4M.
yeah, on the 18th. We still have the 11th available for something.
Or
Um,
N?
You could do 5 and 6.
You know what you could do on the 11th is the regular meeting
Well, that would be what we would have.
and catch up on things like what are we going to do at the community festival?
Well, that would be something that would probably have to be, okay. So we'll just have a regular meeting and we'll skip the fun of the reading of the EIR.
Maybe population and housing.
You could have Lloyd Zola come at the regular meeting
As opposed to on the 29th? That's fine.
and I wouldn't hear him
Oh,
speak
okay.
again, but I've heard him speak now for a total of 9 hours.
That makes,
But there's just some people you just can't get enough of, I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
that makes sense.
So let's do Lloyd Zola on that night, and you guys can all...
On the 11th.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So that frees up time on the 29th for you then.
So on the 29th, we can add another one besides 4G.
hazardous material,
I don't think so.
Okay, so let's just, okay.
You think 4G is going to be a 2.5 hour?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
Okay.
just staffing.
And then September 28th, we did not schedule anything for the weekend between that.
May I suggest, I think we've kind of covered the important ones. I would like to hold off on further scheduling until we see what the council is going to do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Because we have to, if we have to skip anything, it should not be the discussion of alternatives or the impact and growth inducement and cumulative,
Oh, my God, no kidding. Okay.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Okay, so,
Well, let's just write this up subject to change.
So I'll put 5 and 6, chapters 5 and 6 for the 28th. And part of it, I think, is if on the 19th, when you go to the city council meeting to talk about extension, is if you have a schedule that you're trying to show that you're trying to meet it, and yet may have some difficulty, because we still don't have in any of this discussion of the comments that staff is writing up on your behalf.
Right.
Because just because we think we're writing up your comments does not mean we've actually captured them in a way that you would like to have them presented.
Oh, yeah. Originally we had talked, okay.
Right, so, I mean, what I would see is maybe that first week in October now becomes, to read comments, but, as I said, that may be, for conversation purposes, this might help council understand the difficulty you're facing in trying to get it all done by October 8th.
Okay.
Just thinking out loud here.
No, I agree. We kind of had that in the memo that a memorandum, but now we
Right.
have even more to, okay.
Right, okay. I've got it written down. I will send out an email tomorrow
Okay,
to everybody.
so now we're back to our regular scheduled programming. Time to move on to the, taking up at Chapter 3, where we left off, which is page 3-44. And this is still, Chapter 3 is still the project description. And under section on page 3-44, under public/open space connection space, wetlands, natural habitat and wetlands would have continuous connections through this area. Recreational uses would include bicycle rentals near multi-use trails and kayak rentals near the lagoon. I do not think that there should be kayak rentals in the lagoon, and unless they've studied that, I don't think that that should be there.
Michelle, before we resume the line by line, can I make a general comment about this
Absolutely.
chapter? I don't understand, and maybe you guys talked about this when I wasn't here. I don't understand why the energy plan proposed by Krebel is not described in any detail in this document.
That would be under the alternatives.
Oh, okay.
Right, so what's going on in best of my understanding, what's happening in Chapter 3 is it's going through the DSP variant,
Right.
CPP, and the CPP variant.
Right.
And then other alternatives are described in Chapter 5?
5.
5, under alternatives.
Okay.
So the Krebel alternative is in Chapter 5.
But why is that? Because I think that means, it inevitably gets a lot less attention.
Right, because this is the project description, and the projects that are being analyzed is the DSP, DSPV, CPP, CPPV. And then then in Chapter 5, it's like whatever alternatives that are out there that are not the project are talked about in Chapter 5.
So basically, Stuart didn't answer your question?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
At one point, I thought the city council said that they were going to study the renewable energy alternative at the same level of detail.
And then
as
they
these other two
didn't.
plans. And
What?
then
They didn't.
I don't think council did that. I mean, I don't think they said that. I think ultimately
Yes,
they're...
they did say that.
Okay.
I was in the meeting where they
okay.
said that.
I can ask John that question then.
And I really would appreciate an answer to that because, partly because reading the more detailed description of the projects that are reviewed in here, I keep thinking, well, what is the renewable energy alternative have to say? And, it may be in here, I just haven't read that far yet, but having it stuck in the alternatives chapter means that it's hard to make a side-by-side comparison as you can do with the other projects. So I just don't quite get it.
Also, they were supposed to at least include it in all of the charts so that you could make a side-by-side comparison, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, it seems to me, I mean, with this,
So a comment you can make is, include the energy alternative as part of the charts throughout. I mean, that might be a comment.
So, could you add that to the
Yes.
comments, please, Stuart?
Sure.
And while you're at it, could you also add that we feel that it should be studied at the same level as the CPP and CPPV as was promised. And that this makes it very much more challenging for us to be able to evaluate the entire draft EIR. Anything else, Glenn? Before we
no, but that's kind of a big one.
Yeah, it's a really big one. I was at several meetings where we discussed this big one, and I was absolutely appalled.
I was just going to say, I think it might be useful I know you want to go through it line by line, but maybe it would be useful just to discuss, if anybody's got any similar comments about this chapter, which is supposed to lay out the thing for us. I'm a little bit concerned we might lose forest for trees.
Oh, I agree.
Going through it line
I've-
by line.
I still will want to go through it line by line, but I do think that we should make the overview comments, and Mary made overview comments on this chapter last time. I made some overview comments, you did as well. Did we capture those overview comments as comments, Stuart?
Yes.
Okay, and so if you have more overview comments on this chapter, do you want to enlighten us now?
No, no, but the absence of the renewable energy plan it's becoming more of a problem the more I read the rest of it.
Right. I agree. So I think let's continue going through it line by line, and when we get to the end of chapter 3, when we've gone through all our line-by-line comments, then we should summarize what we feel about chapter 3.
Okay.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we also still have to do the beginning of chapter 7, sustainability, which I know we have a lot to discuss about that, and that's really where the renewable energy component is lacking and makes it hard to evaluate. So, anybody else have anything on 344? On 345, I would like this chart to reflect how high above current sea level this is, because the soil level above sea level seems to fluctuate daily. And so for a basis of accuracy, I'd like to know how high above sea level it is at median tide.
Agreed.
Because otherwise it's too easy to manipulate the illustrations and the sort of visual site things for the aesthetics chapter. And then when they talk about the floor area ratio, I would also like that listed in square footage, since all of the other charts are in square footage. There's two things here. One is the floor area ratio. And then when they talk about the development, like the 8.1 million square feet, I would like in the 8.1 million square feet, that's talking about surface square feet as opposed to like the floor area ratio. In other words, I'd like these charts tied together so that you could see when you're looking at this minimum and maximum floor area ratio in the buildings, then I want to know like what's the configuration of that? Are you understanding what I'm talking about? It's a geospatial thing.
No, I'm thinking I do. So what,
Kind of.
right, so what you're saying is that if a building has a square foot of 500,000 square feet, that what you're saying is that is the square footage, the length and the width of the building, and not the height. And
Or is it?
and what I'm used to is when you talk about a 500,000 square foot building, is its length, width times the number of floors. So you might have a 30,000 square foot footprint, and if you have 10 floors, that would be considered a 300,000 square foot building.
Right.
Okay, so basically,
So the 7 or the 8 million square feet, under what I would consider normal conversation, would be total square feet up, not square feet
Not the
of covered area.
footprint.
Not the footprint.
Right. So I think that for us to be able to really get a good view of what they're talking about when they're talking about minimum and maximum floor area ratios for these different plans and variants, that it's important to relate that to the square footage so that we have kind of apples to apples charting, and then also what the horizontal footprint is.
Okay, so I'm still just trying to understand. So let's take a mixed-use one,
Oh,
the
from
very
this
first one
chart.
on the chart.
Uh-huh.
So my best recollection is an acre is 44,000 square feet. And that's plus or minus a few thousand, a couple thousand square feet. So a minimum floor area ratio of 1 would be that building would have 44,000 square feet in it. If it went to 160 feet high, that would be I think that's 10 stories, 12 stories? Let's say 10, only because I might be able to do math. So that would be a building that could have a 4,400 square foot footprint. And then if you were to do a 3.5 FAR, that would be a building that would have a 14,000 square foot footprint. And is that what you're looking for? Okay. Just trying to...
Because I think it's important for people, and I think that the average person reading this is not going to really be able to visualize when you look at a floor area ratio and translate that into what that's going to be out there and what that means.
Right.
Like, how many Transamerica pyramids is that we're planning to put on the Baylands in variant 1 or variant 2? And so unless people have an understanding of the math involved in this and can actually see it in one chart saying, okay, this variant, we could have between this amount and this amount of floor space or, usable space devoted to this with this footprint.
Okay. So what I've got, my note down, and Christina will obviously watch this and then take her own notes, but I've got square foot of footprint is what you're really looking for, is what area the footprint covers of an acre.
It's kind of both. It's the footprint, then the square footage or of floor space, and then the FAR. Because the FAR translates to square footage of foot space. See, here it's saying the building could be a maximum of 160 feet tall.
Right.
Okay? You could have just one big, giant cube of
Right.
empty space.
You could.
You could. And that's what it says. So I want to kind of compartmentalize so that you know what those options are when you look at a chart like this, so that anybody could walk in and say, wow, this could either be this all the way up to this. And I kind of think that's important, especially in relation to when people are looking at the pictures with all these,
Right,
like
in Chapter 4A.
Yeah, in Chapter 4A, that's their interpretation of the FAR and the square footage and the maximum height building.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that's what it's going to be, because this gives you a whole range of possibilities within that.
Right. And as I said, I'm just trying to figure out, I understand the comment, and we can put it down. I'm just trying to think of how they're going, of how that's going to be able to be written up in a way that is two-dimensional. Because you're right, you could build according to this, you could build a barn on an acre.
Yeah,
So you make the barn, covers the entire acre, and the barn is 160 feet high, and you fill it with corn, right? Because that's what silos are, basically.
right.
Or you could say that you take the same thing and you build the same silo, and you build 3 floors. So, I mean, the range of it, I'm trying to figure out how they're going to work with that, but the comment I understand.
Okay, and so my reason for this is because it has a lot to do with what the potential occupancy is.
Right.
and what the potential uses are. And if you have a building that's 160 feet tall and each floor is only 10 feet, of course, in a modern building, it probably wouldn't be, but in
I think
theory, you
like,
could have
yeah, 10
16
to 12,
floors.
right.
The footprint of the building is, 5,000 square feet, times that many floors would equal X number of office workers or X
Right.
number of cubicles or whatever.
Right.
So I think that it's really important for people to be able to look at these tables and these metrics and numbers in ways that each person can kind of get a visual and get a reality check when they're looking and saying 12 million square feet versus 8.5 million square feet. That could take a lot of different configurations and a lot of different volume
Yes.
as opposed to, so that's why I think it's important to, when you're talking about the project description and the site and everything, to be really clear on those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've got the note down.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on 3.45? And then on 3.46, I was curious about design and construction of the proposed grade 9 through 12 charter school, et cetera, et cetera. If there is no housing on the Baylands, what would be the need for schools on the Baylands? And so I'm just bringing that up because I'm sure this is going to come up later in housing and public services, because they compared us to the statewide average of people whose children go to school where the parent works instead of where the family lives.
Okay. But there's no comment here, you don't think? You think the comment will be in public services?
Well, I just don't understand why there's, agencies' jurisdiction over site development, studies to be conducted and issues to be resolved. I don't understand why this thing about the high school is here. I don't think it really belongs there.
It's part of the plan.
It's part of the plan to build a high school,
Yeah. It's,
even if there's no housing.
it's one of the things that the council asked to be studied.
Right, it's in the CPP, and that's why it's here.
Oh, okay, all right.
I think there was a whole conversation in the community years ago about trying to get a charter high school closer to where Brisbane residents lived. And I think that's why they asked for it to be studied.
It's still an active discussion, as far as I know.
So that wouldn't be under Jefferson Union, would it, though? Because
Yes.
it's Bay Shore.
But it's the high school is Jefferson Union High School District.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Bay Shore is an elementary school district.
Yeah. But
So-
somehow I thought they were in a different high school district.
No.
But no, okay. Done.
So on 3-46, sort of the same thing in terms of the Ecology permitted uses, the acreage, and the square footage, and the volume of the square footage. Because they don't have any FARs for this, in this part. Anybody have anything in the next section? 3-48? 3-49?
So we did go 3 pages.
Yeah, this time. And I guess one of my questions is, how does Ecology's separate draft EIR affect this draft EIR? That's just kind of a general question. 3-52, under construction, the expansion would require the use of some heavy equipment for demolition and earth-moving operations. Equipment would include several excavators for demolitions and earth-moving operations, as well as bulldozers to move earth around the site where cut and fill is required. All fill would be obtained from current on-site sources. I guess I have questions about the safety of that, and I hope that it's addressed further along when they talk about that. Or do they talk about it? This is operations, components of proposed expansion. And then on 3-53, the very top bullet point says delete ref under general plan amendments. It says delete references to former owner of the UPC property. And that indicates to me that the UPC property has changed hands. And I would like to know if there was a tax increase with the change of ownership under Prop 13 laws? Or is this another mischaracterization when they talk about the former owner as opposed to the current owner? And then
That
the,
UPC was the current owner and Tuntex was the former owner.
well, supposedly, are they the same entity or not? If they're not the same entity, then we should have had an increase in property
Yeah.
taxes, and if they are the same entity, then we wouldn't have.
I know Michelle's brought this up before. Have we heard anything back about this, or? Okay.
And I don't think I think UPC subsidiaries own some of the land, and I'd like to know what land and which subsidiaries and where they are.
The fourth bullet point talks about modify policy 38.1 roadway level of service standards to recognize current roadway levels of service standards will be exceeded due to future development in other cities, even if no development within the project site occurs, and provide roadway level of service standards that accommodate the level of project site development approved for the development of the Brisbane Baylands project site. I have questions about that because, like ours, where we are supposed to, like, things in our project wouldn't go forward if the other projects didn't do their part, then their projects affect our project here. So why would we have to change our general plan based on their projects? I don't think that we would.
Right, I think,
I think that's BS. Why would we have to change our level of service standards based on proposed future development unless it happens?
right, so I think, the way I read it, is that we know we're going to be below D,
Why?
no matter what.
No, who says?
Well, I think we're below D even as we speak.
Then,
Can I interject?
yeah,
I understand you have a concern about this,
yeah.
but I don't think it's part of the Open Space Committee's work.
You don't?
No.
Why?
I mean, I think it's, I think what we're trying to do here is to see is to determine if and how the draft EIR can better evaluate the environmental effects of these proposed developments. And I think whether or not the city changes the general plan for the service level just doesn't matter to what we're doing here.
Okay, except that the way that I look at it, if we're making comments on the site and the project description, then we should be thorough about making sure that that level is set correctly in this document when they redo the document. But I'm willing to move on and more quickly. And then in the general policy plan number 330 program, I'd like us to define, it says not to exceed 45 feet in height and not to exceed 6 stories in height. I'd like us to define height from where, since that's been an issue. I have nothing on 3-54 or 55. On 3-57, I'm concerned that they talk about the Sierra Point Parkway extended with a maximum building height of 16 stories, but they don't talk about shading from the sun and the bay. That's probably not really, this is really about the different districts. And then 3-60, funded cooperatively by a combination of public and private sources. I'd like that to be more clearly defined and identified, because a combination of public and private sources is very vague.
Where are you?
On 3-60 up here, it says,
Paragraph?
paragraph 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Since those things are, the plan is contingent on those things, I'd like to have that clarified. And the same thing with 3-61, last paragraph.
Again, I think that belongs more in other comments on the EIR than besides what this committee is doing.
Well, it bears on traffic and circulation, whether it gets funded or not.
Yeah, I guess there I would disagree a little bit, Mary. I think there's all sorts of proposed stuff in here, which we're assuming is going to happen. What if it doesn't? What if the funding doesn't come through? Or are we talking about, lots and lots of private cars driving on the existing streets? And that's something that I think is just sort of unclear through here. There's all this stuff that, is supposed to happen, that may happen, but what if it doesn't happen? And how sure are we that it will happen? And if it doesn't happen, then what sort of traffic impacts are we going to be looking at? I don't know.
But I think that's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you just expressed the question. For one thing, we haven't discussed the traffic and circulation element of
Right.
that part. And I think that's the question. What happens if these things don't happen? Not who's going to pay for it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right, but the paying for it is part of why it may not
I'm
happen.
trying not to get bogged down in these picayune details.
Yes, I agree.
Really.
I agree about not getting bogged down, but I think that the paying for it is part of whether, determining whether it will happen or not. And it's not very well described here. And maybe that's normal for a DEIR, that it doesn't get described, but it's a little unnerving that it isn't described more specifically. So, but that would be the comment all by itself, that it's not really very clear. These are kind of dreamy, fuzzy little things. They're not very reassuring.
And Chapter 3 sets the tone for all that is discussed in Chapter 4. So if Chapter 3 is mischaracterized, then it's not going to be addressed properly in Chapter 4. So, like, for instance, on page 3
Well, there's a lot of things in Chapter 4 that aren't in Chapter 3, including elements of the site description.
But isn't this the site description part that we're going through right now, or the project description?
Yes. And I'm just telling you, there are a lot of things in Chapter 4 that aren't in Chapter 3, including the site description.
Yeah, I guess I don't have as many comments on Chapter 3 because I kind of skimmed Chapter 3 thinking that
I don't-
Chapter 4 was going to be
Right. I
the
think-
meaty part.
Yes.
Well, I can write up my questions on Chapter 3 by myself, but like under pedestrian and bicycle paths, it talks about the specific plan to have traffic calming effects, but and it talks about the site plan proposes one pedestrian overcrossing over the Caltrain right-of-way and Tunnel Avenue for pedestrian and bicyclists. And yet, how in the hell are they able to talk about how it creates circulation when it says there's only going to be one
Sorry, you lost me
overcrossing?
there.
Pardon?
You lost me there.
Well, okay, but in reading Chapter 3, I don't think we want to be criticizing the plan. I think that comes when we evaluate the traffic and circulation part. I think that's when we want to talk about this, because otherwise, we could, that's what the specific analyses are for. This is just a description of what the plans are, and as near as I can tell, it's accurate, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, a lot of these substantive discussions should be in connection with Chapter 4.
Yeah.
The only thing I think maybe could be covered a little bit better in Chapter 3 is how it's going to be paid for, since that seems like a descriptive part, but maybe that's somewhere else.
Well, the part that I have a problem with is the descriptive part of this is the one thing that most people will read. And if the
Well,
description
good point.
is not characterizing it correctly, then people are going to read this and they're going to go, hey, we're going to have, all this traffic calming effects, we're going to have all this traffic circulation, and we're going to have pedestrian and multi-use trails and kayak rentals and a reconfiguration of Visitation Creek, and this sounds great and I'm going to vote for it. When the reality is, there's only going to be one crossing over the railroad tracks way up at Caltrans, okay? So how are you going to circulate your bicycle around that, baby? And there's only, and how is, you're going to have canoeing and kayaking on the lagoon? I mean, get
The
real.
fact remains, though, that a lot of that should be discussed in connection with traffic, which is in Chapter 4, and then we can criticize that.
Right, but if we don't correct the site description, then everybody reads
But what's
this.
wrong with the
Well,
site description?
You're not correcting the site description, you're correcting, you're criticizing the plan description,
Right, criticizing the plan description.
which is not the same thing as correcting it, because these are the plans that were submitted.
Okay,
Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah, but I guess I'm questioning how they're characterizing it as a traffic calming effect and to reduce distances of pedestrians and that
And
kind of things.
I don't think this is I haven't read the traffic part yet. I think I'm
Okay.
going to have a lot of comments on that, but this is not where we want to do it.
Well, then I want to reserve the right to come back and make comments on Chapter 3,
Okay.
because I think Chapter 3 is very mischaracterizing what they're planning to do.
I think what you can do is after you read Chapter 4 and the traffic circulation, if Chapter 3 is not consistent with
Right.
Chapter 4, you would want to point out the inconsistencies between Chapters 3 and Chapter 4. And I think that might answer both questions.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay?
I just don't think we have the enough information yet to do that.
I think all of your input is very valuable, Michelle, and you should definitely, even if we choose not to go ahead with Chapter 3 tonight, you should definitely keep all your notes on Chapter 3 so that if those things do not turn up to be adequately addressed in Chapter 4, you can come back and pinch and pound on Chapter 3, because it does need some pushing around, definitely.
Okay?
And I think some of these things are going to be your personal comments on the draft DIR.
Like, okay. I just have questions, that's all, and if you don't, it says here, for the purposes of this, on 3-66, for the purposes of this EIR analysis, it is therefore assumed that the total amount of renewable energy generated under all four scenarios would be the same. Do you think that's a true characterization?
Haven't gone through the energy part of Chapter 4 yet, so we don't know.
Okay.
But I would say it kind of looks like it. I mean, they've all got land set aside for a solar farm. They all talk about rooftop solar, but we haven't looked at the part of Chapter 4 that analyzes that yet. So I don't feel like I know the answer to that.
Okay. Well, does anyone else have anything for Chapter 3?
Just trying to flip through and see if there's anything that really bit me. Man, I read this, but I don't feel like I read it. Looking at this and I'm like, what?
Just one comment, and it's not really a criticism of Chapter 3, but I was struck by the wording of Chapter 3.67, which I assume to be an accurate characterization at the top of the page. This is about the water agreement. While it has been proposed to provide an insured water supply for the Baylands, the agreement is being considered as an independent component of the project site development and could be approved or not, regardless of any action taken by the city. I'm curious about, well, I guess, Stuart, maybe you can answer this. Does the water have to be in place before any development can proceed?
My understanding is yes, that there is not guaranteed water for a building. on that site at this point in time.
Okay.
So if you can't guarantee water to a building, then you can't build a building.
Okay.
I mean,
So,
yeah, I don't understand, this is one of the things I'd like to ask Zola about.
Well, I think what this
So-
is trying to say is that we could still sign an agreement, no matter whether we approve a concept plan or not.
Yeah, I think that the phrasing is awkward.
It's awkward, but I think that's what it's trying to get to.
The opposite.
This EIR covers the water transfer? That there's no separate EIR besides this?
No, there is a separate EIR.
there is a separate ER.
That's how I,
Okay, so, because I looked at that,
that's
actually.
how I read it. It didn't make sense.
Yeah, maybe they could just clarify.
My interpretation of this, after having sat through the water agreement thing, is that the water agreement goes forth or not forth as a separate agreement, and if this does not go forth as a plan, we would still be committed to the water agreement. And vice versa. If the water agreement does not go through, then it's sort of, this would have to be within the confines of the amount of water available.
Yes. That makes sense. That's how I understood it, too. Is that the water agreement is a separate agreement, and that it may or may not be approved whether or not there is a project that is approved.
Then, this is probably a stupid question, but why go through all this if we don't know we have the water? If we don't have the water, none of this can happen.
Because our 25 years could expire on the water agreement before we
Well,
got anywhere.
it'd be a 50-year agreement,
50 year.
because we have a term sheet that we will negotiate for water. So therefore, there is for the draft DAR, there is a plan to get water. So they can
Okay.
do that analysis.
Okay.
We have already made an agreement that's under, with the OID to get water.
Well, we've agreed to talk about getting water.
Right.
We haven't agreed to the specific terms we haven't signed a contract to say we will have water. We've agreed to terms to talk about getting water.
Right.
I hope they have improved their terms from those initial terms. That's a sideline. Spend more time at city council. So does anybody else have anything they want to buzz through on chapter 3?
Well, just along the same lines in the water issue, I'd like to know what other contractual agreements and commitments have been made against the same quantity of water that they're promising us. And that's on 3-67, where they will divert, 257,000 AFYs of the Stanislaus River, et cetera, et cetera. So what other commitments and agreements have been made against that water?
It was in the Hunter's Point.
Right. And other projects around the state? And I'd kind of like them to explain section 3.11 remedial actions. I don't understand that.
What, the whole section, you mean?
Well, this paragraph, while the need for ongoing remediation of the former landfill and rail yard does not result from project site development under any of the proposed concept plan scenarios. Like, why don't they have to go ahead and finish that up and clean it up, regardless of what happens?
Well, I can tell you that we've had the Regional Water Quality Control Board come to PEG meetings and say that as far as they're concerned, OU2, which is the southern part of the rail yard, is not, that they're not going to require any cleanup of OU2 unless there is, unless the land use changes.
But it's a Superfund site.
Yes.
But there's no money in the
But there's
Superfund.
nobody out there, is the reply. So it's okay.
So,
So if I go set
That's
up
why I
a
don't
tent on
understand it.
OU2 and sleep in it one night a week,
Yeah, if that became a Girl Scout camp, or a Girl and Boy Scout camp, yes, then they might require something else, but,
But if you actually camped there one night a week, you would be trespassing. Just,
I'm just
And you'd probably start to
theoretically
glow in the
beyond that
dark.
issue.
but if the proposed use was as a campsite, then
Right.
then they would require something more, yes. But
so what comment would you like me to write down?
I guess I would like clarification on why they don't have to clean up the toxins if nothing gets developed there when they bought it knowing that they would have to clean up the toxins. And I guess that brings me to 3-69, paragraph 3, to bring the former Brisbane landfill into compliance with the appropriate portions of Title 27, et cetera. Why haven't they had to do this already? I don't understand that either.
I mean, I think ultimately it's what Mary was saying.
because the actual requirements are going to be based on what the proposed land use is.
But right now, they're not in compliance with Title 27.
And nobody's worried about that, besides you and me and the town of Brisbane. I'll tell
Well,
you, the county's not worried about it, the Department of Toxic Substance Control isn't worried about it, and the Water Board isn't worried about it. The county, and I forget what the name of the county agency is going to have to close the land, officially close the landfill. And they're just they're waiting for the same thing, for a land use to be specified.
Let sleeping dragons leachate.
Yeah. Well, no, it has been pointed out to them that leachate was flowing into the lagoon and the Guadalupe Canal, and they have required, the sites of leaching next to the lagoon have been required to collect that leachate and pump it to the Bayshore sanitary sewer. The
But wait,
leachate in the Guadalupe Canal does not, as it has been tested, does not meet any requirements for actually treating it.
But wait, isn't our sewer system one of the ones that takes the solid matter and recycles it into the cake for the wine district? No?
No, but we ship it back to San Francisco Public Utilities.
Yeah. I thought they were
The
one of the ones.
organic waste does that.
Okay,
San Francisco.
okay.
It turns the nice
Some places the sewer does.
fertilizer for now.
Fertilizer, yeah. And I thought ours was one of them, but maybe I'm mistaken. That would be interesting, though, if they're dumping all the leachate into the sewer system and then shipping it up to Mendocino.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, something to think about.
on page 3-71, it says, however, soil in the San Mateo County portion of OU1 has not yet been remediated. Prior to any ground disturbing activities for development within the two operable units, an updated remedial action plan will be required to be prepared and approved by DTSC for OU1 and the RWQCB for OU2. But aren't they moving that dirt already? Didn't they already say they were going to be moving that dirt?
No, that's in San Francisco.
I thought they were moving the dirt from Brisbane to San Francisco. Okay.
Not yet.
In the landfill area on 3.12.1, I have a lot of concerns in that, and the accuracy of that paragraph. But you guys don't want to go over these in detail then? do you want to,
Well, if you think it's inaccurate.
If there's really something wrong with the description, then we probably should hear it. So,
well,
do you think something's wrong with their description?
yeah.
Okay, so let's hear it.
It says the estimated amount of settlement that would be accommodated is approximately 18 to 30 inches over a 20-year time period. And then it talks about the finished grades of being 21 to 26 feet above sea level at the conceptual grading, but that's not what it is right now. And it has certainly subsided a great deal more than that over time. It says that only 700,000 cubic yards of soil have been added to the site since 2007, and there's a whole lot more out there already. And then they talk about bringing 2.6 million cubic yards of soil to the rail yard, but they don't talk about how that's going to change the water flow or anything. I guess just I feel like all of this is not based on fact, and I don't see where it refers to any sections where this would be questioned.
Well, do you have other figures? I mean, I have no clue how many cubic yards of soil are there. I mean, do you know?
Yeah, and this was as of 2010, right? So,
Yeah. But,
I mean, they got the figures from someplace.
so I'd like to know where.
Oh, that's probably in the,
oh, there's
I
a
don't
comment.
see any,
Well, it says that all elevations are based on the National Geodetic Vertical Datum of 1929, NGVD 29, BKF 2011.
where are you
There you
seeing
go.
that?
The footnote at the bottom of the page,
On which page?
3-71.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about 3-72, when they're talking about all these cubic yards of soil.
That comes,
Well, but-
so BKF is
yeah, it's.
the
listed
Brown and
roughly.
Caldwell Geosyntec Graphcom Millennium Design and Treadwell, that's on page 381.
Yeah.
There's is what the BKF thing is. It's a draft Brisbane Baylands Infrastructure Plan, Chapter 11, Dry Utility Systems Prepared for Universal Paragon in February of 2011. So that's what it's referring to.
And that's in the appendices, I assume.
Or else you could look it up. I mean, the whole thing may not be in there, but you could probably find it someplace. So I'm curious, so if we were to quarrel with this, or if we were to question this, on what, why would we?
Why would we question it?
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't think I could. I have no idea how many cubic yards of soil are out there. But so, do you have some basis for saying that you don't think it's accurate? And what's the significance of that?
Well, the significance of it is how much will it really subside over the settlement period, which they're saying is 18 to 30 inches when they don't even know what's under there. And then when they put that much weight on it of the soil, and then that much soil is actually going to change the water flow.
If you look at geology, soils, and seismicity, they do make recommendations about accelerating the settlement. I think it might be better to save this discussion until that section as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that one is actually in the appendices B1, that report. So we're holding off until geology on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just have a lot of questions throughout the rest of it, but I don't think we have the appetite to go through it line by line.
Is it typed up, Michelle? Are you going to type it up?
I hadn't intended to type it up.
Okay.
But, I mean, we all have a lot of questions about it. It's just what's a useful comment? A useful comment is not, this sounds bad to me,
I know. I guess that I feel like though, if we're going to talk about having the EIR, this is the EIR document. This is our EIR document. And so if we want this to reflect what we think is important, especially like objectives identified by the city of Brisbane, like under, on 3-73 on item J, design the project sensitively to protect Brisbane's viewshed, taking into account light, spillage, pollution, building height, massing, and placement of landscape features. But we don't care about the bay's viewshed of Brisbane and San Bruno Mountain? We only care about our view out, not our view home?
This is what the city council gave them.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is this what the city council gave them?
That
Well,
would
I
be my
mean,
understanding.
I don't know that the city council, in their great and infinite wisdom, were able to think of everything.
Which is why I'm suggesting that changes be made to that.
Yeah. I'm not going to think of it.
Well, I'm just going to skip this then, and let's go on.
I would like to suggest a short break.
Okay.
Short break?
Yeah.
Take us out there.
Okay.
Short break.
8 o'clock,
Yep.
7:53.
I guess I might as well go to the ladies' room.
Pardon?
I just feel like, okay, we should really make sure that this is correct,
Are they
but
up there?
people don't have the appetite to do that.
Que el camino suba hoy a tu encuentro, que el viento dé siempre en ti, que el sol ilumine tu cara, que el rocío acaricie tus campos, hasta que nos encontremos de nuevo, que Dios te guarde en el hueco de su mano, en el hueco de su
Oh, we can't swear anymore.
Otherwise, we'll lose our FCC rating.
Yep. This is a children's show.
We're good? We're good.
Okay, we're reconvening. We are going to skip the balance of Chapter 3 and revisit it after reading Chapter 4. So now we are moving to Chapter 7, Sustainability. So would someone else like to lead this section? Who's on the Sustainability Committee?
I am.
Oh, okay. Glenn, do you want to lead this chapter?
Not particularly, I'm not, they don't really define sustainability very well. I think they don't really define sustainability very well. And no, I hadn't planned on leading this discussion, so.
Can I say something? Okay, I'll
Yeah.
say something. Okay, there's like four pages of blather here, and then, a list of some of the mitigation measures that are actually described in detail in other parts of the DEIR. The most objectionable thing I find in here is the American Planning Association identifying sustainability as being able to meet the needs of a growing human population that has rising aspirations for consumption, while maintaining the rich diversity of the natural, environmental, or biosphere. So, and I think that's absurd.
I think it's
that-
offensive.
Yeah.
Well, it's absurd. I don't think there's any way that you can have more than, what is it, 7 billion now?
Yeah.
We could keep growing up to 8 and 9 billion, and everybody has more stuff. And we're going to and somehow we're going to be able to, and somehow we're going to call that sustainable. I think that's, yeah, it's ridiculous.
I mean, what's the average American's footprint? 5 Earths. So if we expect everybody on this planet, we're going to need a few more planets. If this is our approach, then we need about 4 more planets to pillage.
Well, as I said, the definition of sustainability, and that's the standard one, is meeting it's meeting the needs of the future, or meeting our own needs without jeopardizing the needs of future people, ability of future people to meet their needs. And it's a very weak definition. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really say anything about overall ecological limits, which in my view is the basis of sustainability, is living within overall ecological limits. But one of the problems, when you look at overall ecological limits and then figuring out how Brisbane, with or without new development, fits into that, that's really hard to do. And that's something I've been thinking about since I've been on the Sustainability Committee. How do you do that? And ideally, it wouldn't just apply to new development, it would apply to the whole city, and, we should be talking about, well, how much do each of us use, and how much energy do we use, and in relationship to how much, to what energy allowances would be for an overall population. I don't know, CEQA certainly doesn't provide for that. I don't know that we can provide for that. For instance, I don't know how much, what a person's share of fresh water would be. So.
2 liters a day. 2 liters a day is what you need to drink.
Well,
Riot for Austerity says it's 10 gallons per person per day. Riot for Austerity. Yeah.
and are we talking about a percentage of a global share? Are we talking about percentage of what's available locally? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much, I have deep questions about how rigorous this is, and I don't know what to do with it, to be honest. I really don't.
Kind of dovetailing on to what you said, on Chapter 7.3, it says, thus many sustainability issues become part of a project's planning process rather than its environmental review, which basically means that this chapter is a big cop-out. in a lot of ways. I mean, and I feel like it should be more, it's just my personal opinion that that sustainability should be integrated right from the environmental review process forward, but according to them,
But what is it and how do you integrate it?
yeah, this is also important.
And the people who wrote this report, they're writing a report that meets that meets CEQA's guidelines. And maybe the CEQA guidelines that have been set for the Regional Water Quality Control Board or the Air Quality Control Board, or all those people. And they're writing a document that they hope will not be overturned in any particular, in a lawsuit. And the lawsuit would be brought under CEQA. And so they're essentially they're saying, CEQA doesn't make us do this, so we're not gonna. It's a very limited process. It's better, but it is better than nothing. And yeah, it's a lot better than nothing. But it's, in my opinion, most of the most important decisions that are going to be made about whatever gets built out there are going to be political decisions and not have anything to do with the CIR.
And yet whether they hold up or not will have a lot to do with the CIR.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, we want to make it as good as we can because it is going to have an impact on how things are built out there.
Well, and within that, I think, you know, the 10 principles set out by the committee, according to One Planet Living, are reasonably good guidance.
Yeah, I do wish we could go back and make that carbon negative buildings. Just because we have so much burden from 101 and our aging infrastructure that I don't know that we can,
I
but
think we said that the project should be should be, oh, no, we said should be energy positive. Should be energy positive.
it's a good start.
Just I'd like to point out that going back to, section chapter 3, on 3-75, there is a part about sustainable living. This is the objectives identified by the specific plan applicant UPC, but they are somewhat in contradiction to the sustainability principles, even the ones put out by the American Planning Association. So,
I mean, getting to Barbara's point earlier, there is, and what Mary said, under the objectives for the city is strive to achieve energy neutrality or better
Yeah.
for the project through a combination of efficiency, conservation, and maximizing on-site renewable power generation. So, I mean, that's that's
Open Space Committee's comments said that we should go for energy positive development.
right. But the objective from that
Yeah.
the council adopted
Right, I get it.
says neutrality or better. So they were trying to get there.
Yeah.
Zero is a very small number.
Stuart, on page 7-2, paragraph 2, project sire development should probably read project site development.
Who did sire this project?
And on 7-3, the last paragraph where it says depleting limited resources, it really should say destroying limited resources, or destroying resources.
On 7.4, I was wondering, project lifespan of 50 to 70 years, and that was just kind of making me scratch my head because, I guess
Sustainable. Yeah, right?
I guess having lived in San Francisco, where so many of those buildings are over 100 years old, I think that we should be building for 100 or 150 year, and that's the only way we're going to reach sustainability. That, planning this disposable society and disposable buildings is not going to cut it. So that just struck me as fundamentally sort of, wrong-headed.
Well, that's because that's all that CEQA is willing to look at.
Okay.
It says right here, SQL has notable shortcomings as a tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're saying right here, it's
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
duh.
According to what I read yesterday, the entire Baylands is at risk of being underwater
Yeah.
within a not-too-distant future, so, I don't know.
Hey, maybe we only need to build buildings that'll last for 30 years.
Yep.
Because there'll all be something.
Well, in the spirit of summarizing what these different chapters say, my summary comments on the sustainability introduction and, sections without reading through all of the materials that lead up to this is that I think that a lot of it characterizes overconsumption. It encourages rapid population growth, and it is dependent on non-renewable resources. There is definitely an accumulation of toxic and harmful substances in the biosphere in this project already, and I do think that there's a disregard for complex natural systems in pursuing human development because we're not really taking into consider letting the land heal itself properly before pursuing it for human population and human development. I think that the social inequities in resource distribution definitely points to distributing resources more towards the developer, financial resources, toward the developer instead of toward the general population and certainly toward the environment. And while there is public participation in political and economic decision-making, it's limiting just by the very density of what's anticipated to produce the correct result. So I'm kind of, I think that the sustainability chapter is kind of I'm glad it's there, but certainly the sustainability principles that are listed in section 3, I think don't meet sustainability standards. It doesn't really talk about sustainability. It talks more about sustainable living, which they're talking more about your day-to-day, how close you can walk, the proximity to transit, the view sheds of Brisbane, high-quality neighborhoods that accommodate regional housing demands. So we should stop having such a high demand for housing.
Toxic waste dump.
Yeah, on top of a toxic waste dump. High-quality neighborhood on top of it. And then proximity to transit and jobs, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there would be proximity to the job that you have.
Right.
And then creation of mixed-use districts that are walkable, pedestrian-friendly, and easily accessible by transit, resulting in a vibrant street environment and lower traffic volumes than with typical development. And yet there is a rail line that runs right through the project, and they have not planned for any additional overcrossings other than the 2 that exist now for pedestrians and anything other than vehicular traffic. So I think that that's really, especially the circulation network of complete streets balancing efficient circulation of pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and personal vehicles with human safety. And no additional overcrossings of the railroad tracks? How can that be? Okay, well, shall we move on to chapter 4?
Yeah, let's do chapter.
I just have one more thing I wanted to say, I think, about this chapter. And so I'm sorry, I read this like several weeks ago. But it seems to me that at no point do they really set out benchmarks for sustainability. They just sort of make a punch list of, gee, wouldn't it be nice to do these things like use low VOC paints? And I sort of was wondering, so I guess I'm assuming there isn't actual criteria for sustainability if it's not being compared to any actual criteria for sustainability to say this is or is not sustainable. And maybe that's the fundamental problem. Like if you get into passive house, there's, a building has to meet a certain number of kilowatts per square foot. Otherwise, it's not considered sustainable. And it just seems that those sort of numerical, like fact-based analysis just isn't in here. Like I said, it just reads like a punch list of superficial mitigation measures.
I mean, my guess is it's because of what Mary said earlier, is that CEQA has yet to the CEQA law has yet to catch up with sustainability, so there is no criteria for a project to meet to be called sustainable.
Yeah.
So this is just kind of a BS chapter?
I think it's a chapter that was asked for by the council, but is
Right.
not required by CEQA.
So it's going to be up to the council to establish what they're going to demand as sustainable.
Right, and I think that's what they're working through when it comes with their sustainability committee.
Yeah.
And I think along with our comments on the draft GIR, we're going to want to make a set of comments to the council on what the draft EIR does not adequately address.
Yeah, or
You
they
know,
can
if you know what I
hold
mean.
these developments too.
What CEQA doesn't adequately address,
Or the permit people.
Yeah. Could you,
like sustainability.
But I think in a lot of cases, we don't really even know what's sustainable. We may have a better idea of what's unsustainable, but not what sustainable is.
so therefore, I think that we should really work on pointing out the things that are in here that are not sustainable, since there is no, as Barbara pointed out, measure or criteria for what is sustainable. We certainly know what is not sustainable.
But on the other hand, I'm not sure myself that you can address sustainability in a single project. I think you have to do it across a society, and so I'm not sure, I don't know, no matter how much we torture ourselves, that we could really come up with a clear definition of what sustainability is. I think there is a question of scale here, and no matter how good this project is, it would still be a little enclave in an unsustainable society, and that is not something that we can fix, really. So,
Well, I mean, I think you have to come up with criteria and hold people accountable to them wherever possible. Otherwise, it's just human nature. Somebody's always going to say, it's not my problem, it's his problem over there.
but then you come up with, in cases where, if you are going to define sustainability as a question of fitting into overall ecological limits, I think in some cases we have a pretty good idea what those limits are, like with carbon. But in other cases, we really don't. And so I think you do end up with a punch list. As much as I don't like that, really, I think that's about probably all we can do here. But whether we should fool ourselves and say that, as a consequence, it's sustainable, I don't think I could go that far. The whole society is not sustainable.
Right.
Yeah.
The direction of humanity.
I guess I just don't want to surrender.
I don't want to surrender either, but
I'll
this
go
is
marching
where I'm
out into
saying that
Jolly
we
Roger
shouldn't
right now.
do things that create more growth inducements.
Yeah.
Well, then there's the fact that this is growth. I mean, should anything be done on the Baylands at all except cleaning the place up? Personally,
Make some nice wetlands.
I have deep doubts about that.
I do too. And that's why I want to go through this line by line and make sure that we cover them all as best as we can. So shall we,
I've got some more stuff, but I think I'd rather type it up.
on sustainability?
On 7, on sustainability, but it's all like little nitpicky stuff.
Okay. Well, we had also
I
agreed
don't really want to.
early on that we would go back through the charts after we've done the other work,
Yeah, it's all in the charts.
because at this point, we can't really evaluate the charts other than like the very first chart where it says
I'm going to type.
through CCNRs, and I don't think doing anything through CCNRs is an appropriate mitigation measure because they are subject to change and people ignore them.
Yeah.
So that takes us to Chapter 4A, Aesthetics and Visual Resources.
I typed up mine and I sort of broke it down into questions, things I felt that weren't clear. Structural problems, I feel that with the mentality or the approach. And then the last section is just typos and problems with wording, which I don't even think we need to go over, but, or I guess everybody could just see if they agree with them or not, and they can go in as comments or not, or, and if you don't, as a committee, feel like it's appropriate, then I can put them in as personal comments,
Okay.
because they're pretty trivial, most of them.
Under structural problems, the second paragraph, the consultant did make did evaluate at a lower level of detail several alternatives, including no project, including present general plan build-out, which is a lot less dense, and including reduced densities of both the developer plan and the city council plan.
Okay.
So it's not entirely omitted, it's just not analyzed at the same level of detail.
Okay, well, that can be. That's probably not a valid comment then. We can drop that one.
Okay.
When we look at the alternatives, you can see if it covers your comment. That's where that would be. Right, Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll hold that comment in abeyance.
Great.
That was my SAT word for the day.
I have some comments. They're kind of line-by-line comments, but unless you think they're not relevant now that we're in section 4.A, I'm going to go ahead and make them. And that is in like section 4-A-1. It says scenic vistas are defined as panoramic views of important visual features as seen from public viewing areas. These views include San Francisco Bay, striking, et cetera, but what about the views of San Bruno Mountain from the bay and from Highway 101? And I don't think that's been adequately addressed, and especially when I looked at their illustrations.
I think Barbara mentioned that in her comments, and I agree with that.
Yeah. And then in the overview of existing visual character, Brisbane is not an urban setting. Paragraph, Brisbane, it says Brisbane is in an urban setting located on the eastern. It's not urban. It is suburban and almost semi-rural in some areas. And then it says that the city is surrounded by urban communities dominated by single-family, small lot, and suburban-style homes to the north and west, San Bruno Mountain State Park to the south, and U.S. Highway 101 and San Francisco Bay to the east, with the East Bay Hills beyond. I do not think that that is a correct characterization because San Bruno Mountain is actually a buffer zone around Brisbane. And so this makes it sound like we are right smack dab against a bunch of urban communities, and that's not at all the case. So I think that is not characterized correctly. And then on 4.A-2, second paragraph, it says, the visual character of nearby areas in Daly City, west of the project site, and San Francisco, north of the project site, is defined by commercial buildings along Geneva Avenue and Bayshore Boulevard, and industrial and residential uses north of San Francisco-San Mateo County border. They don't talk about the visual character really of like the Cow Palace, which is a main visual icon that you could see when you're sailing on the bay. And they don't talk about the value of seeing Candlestick Hill, or whatever they call it in here. They call it Bayview Park. And so I think that that's not really clarifying it. And then in the next paragraph at the very last, it says, as well as nearby urbanized areas of Brisbane, San Francisco, and Daly City. I would call those suburban at the very best, but not urbanized. And then it says the site is, next paragraph, partially screened from view along the US 101, as well as Bayshore Boulevard due to vegetative growth along Highway 1 and 1. That's not actually true. You can see the mountain when you're driving south on 101, because I look at it every day, but now they have a big pile of dirt there. And those scrubby little bushes that were planted there are really, I wouldn't call that proper vegetative growth. And then it says with a view of the mountain in the background, but it makes it sound like it's insignificant, and it's not insignificant at all. And I think that's a bad characterization. And then on section 4A-4, it says that native vegetation types, including coastal scrub and perennial grasslands, are confined to a relatively small areas on Ice House Hill in the western portion of the project site, to the tidal and freshwater wetlands along the edges of the drainage canals, etc. But that's not really true either. There is a lot of coyote bush. There's stands of native Douglas iris, and a lot of vegetation that's still native in that area, not on Ice House Hill, but between Ice House Hill and the railroad tracks. And so I don't think that that is true either. And then it says, currently provides a limited amount of riparian vegetation and habitat, referring to Visitation Creek, but it actually provides quite a lot of bird habitat. I've seen, egrets and herons and all kinds of birds in that channel there, and that is tidal. And then it says, earlier in this section, it talks about, on section 4-4, sorry to go backwards. It says the CEQA guidelines and case law recognize that the date for establishing an environmental baseline cannot be rigid. And it goes on to say, furthermore, environmental conditions may vary from year to year, and in some cases, it is necessary to consider conditions over a range of time periods. And I think that that's particularly important on page 4.A-4, where they're talking about the soil processing and related large stockpiles, and also the on-site activity being screened from major roadways. It's not screened from major roadways at all, and I think that this is a case where the baseline should be adjusted, because that was an allowed use to help with remediation, and now they make it sound like that is, the way it is and always has been, and that's not the case. And in the very last, second to last line on that page, it says, the riprap embankment supporting the railroad tracks along the eastern edge. That should read the western edge of the lagoon, not the eastern edge. Page 4A-5, the figure 2B of Visitation Creek. I'd just like to point out that that's a high tide photo, and I think it mischaracterizes the nature of the creek. And then section 4-A-6, they finally show a picture of the roundhouse with the glory hole in the middle, which is where there's intensive amount of, has been in the past, unless they've poisoned it again, an intensive amount of frog habitat and native habitat in that hole in the center of the picture. And that's about as far as I got into this chapter. So, besides looking at the pictures, which I think are very mischaracterizing the way that the view sheds will be. My biggest objection so far in this chapter is that they do not take into account the view sheds from the bay and the 101 looking back at Brisbane. I do not think they characterize that properly. And the angle of several of the photos that they've taken to demonstrate that in this book are purposefully misleading. And I can point out some examples if you want.
Just a couple of comments. I think I agree that I like Barbara's list of 3 valuable viewpoint locations. I think that's a good list, and it includes the ones that you were talking about, Michelle, and also adds one from downtown Brisbane. I wanted to talk a little bit about these pictures that show the buildings and the views. I think it wasn't clear to me, but I don't think they did any computer simulations of what it would look like with the mitigations that they proposed for building heights and stuff. And I thought that would be helpful. And I think another thing that would really be helpful is, and I bet you they can do this, is some kind of computer simulation of the impact on night lighting in each of the scenarios, especially the entertainment one. I think that would be really valuable for people in Brisbane to be able to see, get a simulation of what it would look like at night, especially with the entertainment venue, which is likely to put out a lot of light. Personally, I was, pretty convinced by the description that it would be a really huge impact, but I think it would be useful for people to be able to see that. And so if they could simulate that, I think that would be great.
Mary, do you want to go next?
I think Ellen just said, it's not going to be Brisbane. It's just these huge things.
What's
it's
that?
Scary. Oh, just looking at these pictures of these massive buildings and stuff. It's pretty scary. I mostly was looking at the section on light and glare, and from the point of view of birds, and maybe more from the point of view of migrating birds than they do.
Yeah.
And this issue is taken up in the biological resources chapter as well. So, and I thought a lot of the things, there are a few mitigation measures in here that are actively at odds with what you would do to minimize the impact on birds. Like, it's better to use cool lighting, cool colored lighting, green and blue. For birds. It's better to use, it's better not to have so much glass at ground level, especially if there's vegetation planted outside the building, because the glass will reflect. And so I really think that we should ask them to ask that the mitigation measure include treating every single window on the Baylands. Birds are used to there being nothing there, and I just think it doesn't have to be exorbitantly expensive. What they call fritting is not. I've read is pretty reasonable. So since they're right next to the water, and since if there isn't, especially the taller buildings, they're going to reflect water, they're going to reflect sky, they're going to reflect vegetation, I think they all need to be treated.
I thought they were all going to be white with no windows. That's what I looked at in the pictures. Sorry.
Anyway, you have the comments that I wrote up.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mary, I thought your comments were really intelligent, and I really appreciate the depth you went into it. And isn't light pollution also an issue for bats?
Yes.
So I felt like
I don't know anything about bats. They do mention bats. In the biological resources chapter.
Yeah, I haven't read that one
They
yet,
also
but
mention it in this chapter on page 4A-38.
Yeah, I think they got one word.
They get
couple paragraphs.
They get more, they get more respect in biological resources.
Well, I'll launch in. Were you able to answer any of my questions, Stuart?
Not yet.
No. Okay.
Sorry.
Does anybody on the committee know the answer to any of these things?
Could you, since the audience or whoever's
Sure,
doesn't
sure.
have this, could you please?
On table, page 4A-21, table 4A-1, viewpoint number 6, there is a massive, massive building on the left side of the image, and I'm wondering if that is the proposed theater or stadium, or is that just some artistic, we're going to put something really giant here. I was just wondering where that came from, and,
I think that's just their 16-story building.
okay, that's their one token 16-story building? Okay, that would just be good to know, because it's, whether it's
Right.
something that's actually inherently part of the DSPV, or whether it's just artistic license.
Representative of something.
Yeah,
We could ask them.
yeah. I'd like to know. I mean, maybe it's nothing, maybe it is something, but I don't know until I've got an answer. 4A-29, it talks about the mitigation measures, reducing building height to 80 feet within 350 feet of the something zone. And I was just wondering, how wide is the project site at the widest point? Would 350 feet cover the entire project site? I kind of think it doesn't. And so I'm wondering, then is the eastern portion not subject to the recommended mitigation measures?
Right.
That was just very unclear to me. And then I don't know anything about holding ponds on the Baylands. Holding ponds? A couple places I've seen mentioned, most specifically on page 32, holding ponds, and I'm just like, I'm sure there's something out there that I don't know
In the rainy
about.
season, they do set aside certain areas so that, yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, for drainage purposes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so that's holding water,
Right.
holding ponds, okay.
Yeah.
And then on page 40, parking lot needs to be the same color, parking lot lighting needs to be the same color as street lighting. And I was just wondering, what is that mitigating? Like, it just doesn't, as a mitigation measure, it just doesn't make sense to me. It seems like a really arbitrary and random rule. I mean, if it's a mitigation matter, it should be mitigating something. And I want to know what it's mitigating. Why is it there?
As I thought earlier, I think it's trying to mitigate night light, the spillage of night.
But it doesn't say that.
Yeah, it's just kind of random.
Yeah, it does. The heading of the whole section says that all developments shall comply with the following lighting design standards in order to minimize project lighting to the extent required for safety and comfort only in order to reduce nighttime lighting effects. And then there's a whole list.
Yeah, but how does the color, I don't know, I just don't
I
understand.
assume that different colors are less.
Right, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, like Mary was saying, blues and greens.
Right.
Why are we tying it all to blue
they
or
need
to
to-
green?
They need to address that.
I mean, it's just this weird.
They need to look into that.
Yeah, and I mean, bulbs, what if they get the bulbs from different manufacturer? Color shifts over time. It's just kind of weird to me. But it's really nitpicky, wiggly thing that hopefully be addressed in the planning process. For my structural problems, I felt the choice of high vistas, their choice of vistas for viewpoints seemed to disregard the impacts on the majority of persons, places, and consider only the impacts on persons and places that would be least affected due to their elevation. I thought a more realistic or useful approach would be to use a topographical map to show from what elevation views become obstructed. So, does that make sense? I have an example here, but I don't know if it needs further explaining.
I think it makes great sense, and I think that every viewpoint of the photos the photo viewpoints should all be located on a map, on an area-wide map.
Yeah, or
They are.
choose.
They are? Where?
Yeah.
Where's
All
the
the
map?
viewpoints are on a map, but I just didn't like their choice because they choose, all these
Oh, yeah.
promontories,
Where's the map?
which means that if you're halfway
Hold on.
down the hill, this doesn't apply to you.
4A3 is the map,
Yeah.
but you would like to see that as a topo map.
I would, because, if I walk 2 blocks from there and I'm like, 5 feet down the hill, and it's a little, I'm exaggerating, but
Yeah, you can't tell what the elevation is of any of the,
Right.
yeah, I just know they've chosen high spots. And my point is that I think that just looking at views with regards to these little islands, these little high points, is not an appropriate way to look at view sheds. And I don't know if that, this is probably something that can't be changed because it's probably inherent to CEQA. But I still felt compelled to make a comment.
I think it's also important that we have some sample view sheds from the actual bay, being, sailing and windsurfing. I sail out there. I love the view of San Bruno Mountain from the bay and, looking across and seeing, the Cow Palace and Brisbane and then the windsurfers. It's a very popular windsurfing park off Candlestick Point, and they also have a view shed to enjoy. Of course, there probably won't be much windsurfing there once they build the buildings, which, do we know where the wind issues are addressed in here?
I don't think they are.
Ooh. Well, that's an important thing that needs to be addressed. It's the wind shadow of these buildings.
My next issue was light pollution, and I felt that the DEIR's assignment of significant unavoidable was, I don't feel that it's unavoidable. I think that if we said that this absolutely needs to be mitigated and that the project developer needs to find creative and technologically advanced solutions for mitigating the light pollution at night, that additional answers could be found. And because I feel that light pollution is an important issue personally. And my thought was just that I just don't agree with the designation of, I agree with the designation of significant, but I don't agree with the designation of unavoidable. I think that mitigation measures need to be found because it's an important issue. And then.
And those would be mitigation measures above and beyond for those that are mentioned
Oh, yeah.
on page 4A40?
Yeah, because they say right in there, their mitigation measures do not mitigate it, do not provide significant mitigation. So I think additional mitigation measures need to be researched and proposed and pursued. But I don't know if that's more part of the planning process rather than the DEIR, but I did not appreciate that characterization of unavoidable because I think it just says, oh, well, it's unavoidable, we don't have to do anything more. And then we already talked about the 3 missing viewpoints, and then maybe I overlooked something. I certainly hope that's the case, because it seems to me on pages 41 through 42, the issue of nighttime glare is addressed very generally, and then specifically from the perspective, or daytime glare, excuse me, from the perspective of cars of 101, but I didn't really see a lot addressing glare with regards to Brisbane, especially Upper Brisbane. It kind of seemed to, and like I said, maybe I spaced out for a paragraph. It happens sometimes. But I certainly didn't see anything that really addressed that substantially.
Yeah, there should also be some type of way to visually express that in here for the people who live in Viewpoint. As they will be significantly affected by the glare off the Baylands. As will animals, airplanes, and
Yeah.
other things.
And the fenestration, not fenestration, fretting will also reduce the glare. So that's I think Mary's got a very good point there, in addition to reducing bird strikes. And then do you want to go over the typos and word problems? I mean, is that part of this? Or we should just, I guess everybody just read it really quick, and if there's anything they disagree with, then we can scratch it from the list, or I'll put it in as a private comment. Or read it when you go home. Or not read it when you go home and say you did.
Yeah, I'd like to revisit this chapter briefly in our next meeting to clean up I didn't get through the whole chapter.
Okay.
And that's why we put it on for Monday, August 5th at 4A, then 4J and 4D.
I thought we were going to,
What are we going to do?
I thought we were going to, 4D was going to get kicked to the end.
Stuart has to send us an
4D is cultural resources.
Stuart, could you send out the list of what you understand we're doing when as quickly as possible, so that if we
Sure.
have misunderstandings or...
I have 4A, 4J, and 4D, and then I had 4D crossed off for the reason that Mary said, but then Michelle said, no, let's get 4D in if we can on the 5th.
Yeah, because if it's short, you
If it's
guys all
short,
think it's short and
right.
not without consequence.
Right.
So we just tag it on there, and if there's anything in there,
And if you don't get to it, you don't get to it that day.
yeah,
That was kind of the impression I got,
was the impression that I
that you gave me.
gave you.
Yes.
Any objections to that? Okay. Anybody else for anything tonight on section 4A? Well, then I think that we should look at the minutes from the last meeting. Was everyone able to read the minutes from the last meeting?
Yes.
Is there?
I had extra copies if you didn't.
Is there?
That didn't print out. Was it in the packet?
It was sent in as a separate email the next day.
I probably missed that.
Would you like a copy?
I
Or do you
would like to abstain so that we can show on the road.
I had
All
a
right.
question. The minutes, should the minutes include the comments from the meeting so that we can review those as well as we go along instead of waiting till the end? Or what would you like to do in that regard? It certainly.
It would take us longer if you would like to have the comments from the meeting itself to be included. So if you'd like, we could hold minutes for a longer period of time as we get those things drafted, because those take longer than just
Minutes.
these.
So are we going to review all the comments at the end, or how do you want to, I'm not sure how we should do that, because it technically is part of the minutes, but then at the same time, it's sort of in more detail.
I think I'd like to do the comments at the end personally, because I think a lot of our comments will be informed by things we glean from other chapters.
Okay,
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so.
so minutes,
Move approval, both sets.
there's only one set here. It's approval of the minutes from July 23rd.
We did two times. We did two last time. We got all caught up.
Okay.
I mean, it might make sense to maybe see some of the comments as we go through as we start going through the chapter 4
Mary's comment.
quicker than at the end. And then maybe look at chapter 1, 2, and 3 at the end after you've done everything. Because 1, 2, and 3 build off of chapter 4.
Okay,
And, I think the sooner we can, the more fresh it is in your mind as to what you said, the easier it will be. Having said that, you're not going to see 4A on Monday because the person who's writing them is off this week.
all right,
Does that make sense?
yep.
Okay. But we'll
So-
try and get them out sooner than just at the end.
So we have the minutes. We have a move to approve. Is there a second?
Can you,
All those,
who moved and who seconded? We're sorry.
Mary moved, Elena seconded.
Thanks.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and if there's no more business for tonight, this meeting is adjourned.
And we'll be back Monday at 6:30 in this room.
Monday, 6:30 in this room.
I can't wait.
My son is so overjoyed because Gregory has sitcom that night as well, which means he gets his babysitter. He loves his babysitter.
Well, how lucky for him.
Yep.
Hey, Stuart, here, I'll give you custody of this pen back, but you have to give it